Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Wikipedia, and this week on the podcast, I speak to Dr. Tony Boutagy. Tony and I have been internet friends for years now, and he is a renowned strength and conditioning coach with over 3 decades of experience. Tony has worked with athletes across more than 30 sports, ranging from national to international levels, and in recent years his focus has shifted more towards physique training, but his expertise spans across hypertrophy, strength programming, periodisation, and the complex interaction between cardio and resistance training. And in this episode, we dive into the science behind effective training methods. We explore how to balance strength and endurance, and get Tony's insights on nutrition and the latest trends in fitness, including sex-related differences in the real world. Whether you're an athlete, a coach, or just interested in optimizing your training, there's a wealth of knowledge here to help you achieve your goals. And I have to say, what I love about Tony is he sings from the same song sheet as some of my other favourite guests, including, of course, Brandon de Cruz, Darren Ellis, Cliff Harvey, Eric Helms. So I just love having these conversations with these experts. For those people unfamiliar with Tony, he is a strength coach and an exercise physiologist based in Sydney, Australia. And his undergraduate degree was in human movement. And he holds a PhD in exercise and sports science from Charles Darwin University in the far north Australia. In his coaching career that has spanned close to 30 years, he has written over 70,000 training programs across a wide range of populations, including the general public, athletes, Olympians, special populations, and those needing rehabilitation from injuries. Tony has been involved in education since 1999, having held various educational positions at several universities in exercise science, physiotherapy, and personal training. His own educational programs for personal trainers, allied health professionals, and the general public have been running since 2002, which have now moved to an online platform since, of course, COVID years. Previously, Tony has been an adjunct associate lecturer at the University of Sunshine Coast, a lecturer at Australian Fitness Network, the Australian Catholic University, NetFit New Zealand, and New Zealand Weightlifting. Over the past 3 decades, Tony has written hundreds of health and fitness-related articles and was the recipient of the 2004 Australian Fitness Industry's Author of the Year Award. And though that was 20 years ago, he is still absolutely up there with the current information and knowledge. So I really think you're going to love this interview. I've popped links in the show notes as to where you can find Tony, both on his website and on Instagram, where he freely shares his insight and knowledge and isn't afraid to go against the grain, if you like, with current sort of trends. So give him a follow if you don't already. Now, before we crack on into the interview, though, I would just like to remind you that the best way to support this podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcast listening platform. That increases the visibility of Wikipedia in amongst literally thousands of other podcasts out there, so more people get to hear from experts that I have on the show, like Dr. Tony Boutagy. All right, team, enjoy this conversation. And I've been aware of your work, and then I came across you on Instagram, and then you were just saying a lot of the same things which I think in my head, even though I don't have your similar experience, and I just thought you'd be super interested to talk to about all of these things.
Well, because I had followed you for so long, I have sent so many clients to you either directly or to your courses, and I think it's one of these small worlds. I used to work in New Zealand 20 or so years ago with NetFit, New Zealand Weightlifting, and a whole bunch of New Zealand things that were around 2 decades ago. And I'm sure we've got a lot of mutual friends and people who pop up on your podcast go, I've met them, and it's been great to connect.
Nice one, Tony. And so give us a little bit of your background. So now you're Australian, right? Although I feel like I hear some South African, but I think I must be wrong about that.
I get that a lot, and I think that's because I train South Africans. I was born in Oxford, England, but came to Australia pretty young. My dad was doing postdoc work there, and I arrived in Sydney and have been here essentially ever since.
Amazing. So a little bit of geek is in your genes then, if your dad was doing his postdoc.
Yeah, correct. I think my love of books and reading came from going into his office at a young age, and there would be wall-to-ceiling books, and I think that just, since then I've been a book collector.
Yeah. Tell me, Tony, have you also always been an athlete?
Yeah, I have. Now, athletes, I think, is a very loose term. I've always been physically active, and finishing university, I was either going to be a musician because I play guitar, and I was teaching guitar and I was playing gigs, and I thought, I'm either going to go to the conservatorium and study music, or I actually really like health and fitness. So I'm going to start training some people and see if I enjoy that. And this is 1995, and I did a human movement sports science degree, and it rolled on from there, basically.
Yeah. How old are you, Tony?
47.
Oh, there you go. Same age, basically.
Great age.
Yeah, great age. This is going to be a great year, as they all have been previously, and they all will be.
Absolutely.
Post. Yeah. So you've got the geek is ingrained, and you've sort of always been an active person. Who inspired you early on to be interested in health and fitness, or was that just something that you sort of developed on your own?
All of my group of friends, I grew up in a really interesting, unique situation. I grew up in a strong religious setting where on weekends we wouldn't go out partying. We would go and ride our bikes around and go swimming, and we were very physically active and challenge each other. So I didn't have a normal childhood. It was really physically active. And I think just inspiring myself to keep up with my friends who are much more talented and better than I were at riding, at running, at swimming, that is what early inspired me on. And then when I was this junior trainer at the gym I was working, so I must have been 18, 19, there was a biomechanist who trained at the Institute of Sport, and he was there finishing a PhD and training clients. And the way he understood movement, because I came from cycling, swimming, running, and I just watched him explain weight training. And I thought, wow, this is a whole next level to lifting weights that I do not know about. So I hung around him like a really bad smell, copied all his programs, asked him a million questions. And that really changed my direction from being a truly endurance-based athlete and love of only endurance sport to really appreciating the role of muscle.
Yeah, and did that translate into your studies as well? Like, what was your PhD on?
That's right. So from human movement sports science, I then gravitated to things that were very weight training oriented. So majored in biomechanics, majored in sports nutrition, muscle physiology. And my PhD supervisor was a track and field expert. So in the early 2000s, I'm going to think maybe 2001, 2002, I enrolled in a master's that we rolled straight into a PhD. We just took out a more ambitious project. And he was an expert in strength, speed, power, and was one of these people that could look at predictor lifts. If you could squat X, you should be able to sprint or jump Y. And it was one of these encyclopedic knowledge of strength training and track and field. You could say, who won what medal at 1972? And he's got the answer. So that really pushed my interest from just purely muscle, because I was personal training, into the athletic endeavors that involved a quality of strength, speed, power, rate of force development, as opposed to just hypertrophy, which I had been working up until that time.
Yeah. And then so, Tony, talk to me about your sort of transition from PhD into this professional space, because I have to say, like, given, your background to this point is not that different from a lot of people in your who will have a similar qualification, but I feel like you are everywhere. You are a voice of knowledge for so many different people internationally. So how do you get to that point where you're the go-to man? Because this is how I see you, just in the realm of on social media and on Twitter and stuff, and you've got such a wealth of knowledge, and your opinion is so valued. So what's been that journey?
Well, I've never been asked that, and I have actually never viewed it that way. I know where I'm not, and I'm not in academia, and purely because going through I was speaking to Jose Antonio about this literally yesterday, in that when I went through my PhD, I did not like the other people who grilled me. And I just felt that they were living in this really, I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, but living in a comfortable office, lecturing their students. But they were so rude and mean when I was doing my thesis. And yeah, that's academia, right? Everyone gets pulled apart when they're doing their thesis, and that makes you stronger. But, I'm a nice guy, and I just didn't particularly like that backstabbing. We're all in the same department. I think there was a better way of doing it, and I'm sure everyone in academia can relate exactly to that. So I thought, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to stay in coaching. I love coaching. I like working with real people. And I had at that time a really nice blend of working with able-bodied and Paralympic athletes. And I would do most of that for free because, as everyone who works in most sports know, there's very little money in it. So we'd offer our assistance, and I would learn from that and apply it to the general public, who then I would earn my income. But what I really discovered at an early age is that I loved reading, and there were so many books, excellent books on the science of endurance training and a little bit on strength training. But I would finish them and think, well, how do I write a program? I would then fly around the world and study with people who were renowned strength coaches, whether they were weightlifters or generalists, and work out what they were doing and how they periodized and how they would approach competition and the off season. And that is how then I learned to write programs, because there weren't really good books about this. And then in the early 2000s, I thought I could probably start running courses to teach other trainers. And I was already lecturing at various places about the theory of training with the basics of this is how you do a program. But I was thinking, this is not how you do a program in the real world. And that's basically the foot in both worlds that you speak of coaching full-time and educating full-time. And it's a really nice balance.
It is. And I'd just like to touch on a couple of things you've said there. And you would have heard me talk about this, I'm sure, because it's rife in the nutrition space as well. Although from a different angle, like you talk about your sort of superiors, for want of a better word, sort of grilling you and questioning you in a way that was almost unnecessarily, critical, if you like. Equally, when you are only in academia and you are only there to teach and you don't translate that knowledge into that real world application, you lose that sense of meaning of what it actually means to be in the real world. And you're in fact talking to a person in front of you, and you're not just focusing on a mean value or what the literature tells you. And I feel like you blend that knowledge really nicely, the same way that I like to apply it as well, because there is research out there which people will spout, this is research, and they're very, very science heavy in a way that almost I don't understand. When I'm listening to them, I'm like, I don't even know what you're saying here. But actually, when you go back and you dive into the research they're talking about, it's mechanistic research, it's preclinical research and stuff like that.
Yeah. And this is encountered in both of our fields that basically work together. Nutrition and exercise, whether it's resistance or aerobic, we're all speaking in the same world. And you can tell when a trainer has gone to do master's or PhD work, and you can see by the nature of their study design that their supervisor drove it all, because you step back and go, I know that person. They wouldn't do a training program or a nutrition design like that. They just wouldn't do it. And when we read studies on what does weight training do to preserving muscle and energy deficit in a certain population, you look at the study and you think, no one's doing that. No one is training like that. And I have a slide in a lecture that I give, which talks about frequency versus splits. And I show everyone, because you look at the conclusion, and the conclusion makes sense about frequency and equating volume. And then I said, but here's the study, here's the program that these people did. So hopefully no one trains like that in the real world. And this is why I think there is a need for academically trained coaches who can access the literature, understand it, know where it fits into the big picture, and then take that and apply it in the general public. Because there are so many good coaches, but they don't know the research. So they get into groupthink or ways of, one of my mentors, one of the best coaches on the planet, is doing things the same way today that they were doing 15, 20 years ago, because it worked back then, so it will work today. And anything outside of that scope, they won't see. And that's another end of the spectrum that is not helpful either. But at the same time, you don't want to just be changing your mind every day that a new study or a new exercise comes out.
Yeah, and I think it's that understanding of the body of literature is really important. So whilst we do need to keep an open mind on things related to nutrition and fitness and change our opinion according to the body of knowledge, that body of knowledge is almost always more than just one study. It would have to be a very powerful, huge, I don't know what kind of study could possibly change a person's mind. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And you would need several that was well designed across population groups, that if coaches had experienced something over many years across different genders, different sporting profiles, and this is where the training variables come in. And training theory, generalized theories of training, have been around since the 1960s. These have been already articulated and they've been expanded, but if you look at the writings, which I do, I have a library at home that has almost every major strength book dating back to the 1800s.
Oh, amazing.
And when you look at that over the years, and let's take the Russian literature of the 60s, the 80s to now, there's not a huge difference. Yes, there maybe aren't special exercises and ways of doing things, but generally you could look at Verkhoshansky and you could look at what people are doing today, and it's pretty similar. Yes, we now understand mechanisms of doing things and why that's happening, but they had often worked it out. And this is an idea that you do need to understand where we have come from and understand that art. And if something is going to change your mind that's been around for 60 years, it needs to be really comprehensive, well-designed study in the target population. And I think this is where you and I have had some discussions where there have been some dissenting out-of-the-box thinking that coaches step back and say, well, hang on, this actually doesn't make sense from both the coaching and what we know about the literature. It seems very fringy, but as with all day social media, if it suits your bias, the people jump on board and it becomes a very popular thing.
Yeah. So Tony, you train both male and female athletes, right?
Yeah, and primarily female athletes.
Yes. Okay. Primarily female. What age groups do you work in?
I have trained juniors. In fact, in terms of athletes, I've worked with as young as 18. So schoolboy rugby at the Australian level, up to masters athletes. And I've worked with masters long distance runners.
Yeah, nice one. And then in Gen Pop, what's your sort of age range there, if there is such
again, teenagers. Currently, I have several clients in my 70s, several in the 60s, and then everyone in between. I think from social media, a lot of people feel that I just train physique competitors, when in reality, they're the ones who want me to film them when they're training. Whereas my 60 and 70-year-olds are like, you're not filming that. You're not showing that anywhere. So, it does not represent what most trainers are doing.
Well, I would say isn't that funny? Because actually, if you were to train and if you were to film the 60s or 70-year-olds, that would make for very good viral content on social media, wouldn't it?
Well, I should really consider it. But we also, I work with a really great team of people who do things that I can't do. I work with a world expert in DEXA. I have a medical doctor. I use a number of great nutritionists. But the DEXA scans in particular, when you look at the DEXA scan of a 62 female or 68 female or someone in their 70s, and we're seeing their bone mineral density right at the top line, off the charts.
Amazing.
These people are lifelong lifters. And we're able to collect data because I've got at least 5 clients I've trained over 25 years. I've collected a lot of data on these people. So it's quite a unique perspective. And yeah, they're all case studies, but this is coaching and it's not academia. And we try and draw inferences from what has worked over many years as opposed to what will work in a 12-week challenge and then no one ever trains again.
Yeah. Tony, is that publishable, your data, just out of interest?
I've got all the data. So it's one of these things called a 24-hour clock.
So inconvenient, isn't it? Only 24 hours in a day, only 7 days of the week.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about your insights into training the female athlete, because there is just so much information out there, and you and I have sort of chatted offline briefly about some of the messages that are put out there and just their applicability to real life. And I chat to a number of women who are in that perimenopause, post-menopause age group, and they are just confused actually about what it is they need to do on a training front. So can you dispel some of the, or add clarity to some of the messages that are out there?
Yeah, and I'm uncomfortable with dispel because what I'll offer is how I see and try and reconcile the literature with what we know, what I've experienced from coaching, but also then speaking to a lot of colleagues who are also coaches who work across the genders. And I've got some really close friends who've worked with exceptionally good world record holding athletes who are female. And we talk shop. What do you do differently? Have you had to change things? The big picture is that good coaching is individualized. And it's individualized in the respect of, firstly, what is your goal? What's the time frame? And then with testing data, what are you not good at? And what do we need to improve? And I can do that very easily because I'm a face-to-face trainer. I'm not working via distance where I'm trying to look at videos and conversations. I can have somebody stand on one leg or jump or do an aerobic test or a battery of flexibility movements. I can see you're tight there, strong there, that left. And from there, we can design programs that go after everything that we see. But over the decades of coaching, and next year will be 30 years, good coaching would have males and females turn up and say, I'm on my period, I'm not feeling great. Or a guy would say, I haven't slept this week because I've had a deal go wrong at work. Or both people say, I'm having a fight with my partner and I'm just not feeling great. And good coaching is to auto-regulate training on the fly. We're going to swap that out. I'm sore here, we're going to change that. I just don't feel like training today. Great, let's keep the ball rolling and do something else. And over the last several years, there has been a greater push to say women have different physiologies. They are not men. And there are different, and this always surprises us because we have known this. And yes, women have been underrepresented in the literature. That's beyond dispute. That is being rectified, but a lot of our knowledge does, especially in training studies, come from men for a very simple reason. Up until recently, the majority of sports science students have been men, and they're very easy to do. And because we didn't know much about the menstrual cycle, the women who were, if they were at the cycle, they had to be excluded because hormones were being tested. Now this is being rectified, as you would know, and we're collecting a lot more data. But the only reason why we know that there are gender differences in a number of different physical parameters is because they have been tested. And we see differences in muscle fiber type, fatigability, oxygen uptake, lactate transport, differences in relative and absolute strength. You name it, on and on, there are gender differences. But when you look at training studies, and this is what I find interesting, you have some people in an 8-week program who barely improve, and then other people who improve 300%. So when you look at the individual differences, male and female, everyone is different. That agrees with what I would see in the gym, is that no two people respond the same way. And the role of the coach is to find out what works better. Do you handle more volume? Do you handle more intensity? Do you need less frequency? And where I see a lot of people who read the science but aren't coaching, they sit back and say, there's gender differences, which means females should do this at this time of the cycle because the literature says you're going to be more lax here. And in post-menopause, you'll have these changes in hormones, so you need to do X, Y, and Z. I take a step back and think, will it really make any meaningful difference? And that's the key word, like meaningful difference that you will notice. Outside of you saying, I'm not feeling great today, would you mind if we don't deadlift because my back's a little achy? I just don't see it making a meaningful difference. But I'm also willing to change my mind, as we said before, if good data comes out to say that there should really, we've done this side by side and this is superior.
Yeah, okay. So essentially, if there are differences we see in the literature that may be significant in terms of statistically when they've analysed the data, that might exist, but it may be different on the gym floor, like as you said, how meaningful is it? Is it actually going to make an appreciable difference? And if not, then it's the individual variation between different people that is the major, and also that person day to day. It's like how they're feeling that day.
Absolutely. You take the same individual and over 6 months, look at their strength or performance outcomes. They wave up and down. And to try and pinpoint that on your phase of the menstrual cycle, if you're premenopause, or the change in your estrogen and your FSH post-menopause, and that's why I just don't buy that, because the individuality of day-to-day variation for everyone is so profound. And it's not my experience. If you talk to any trainer who has worked with the same people across many years and plot their strength changes, it is like this up and down. And it's a scatter. You cannot say, oh, that was when your E2 was really low and that was when no, you can't do that. So good coaching is just asking them at the beginning of the session, how are you feeling today?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Tony, can you help clarify, I suppose, some of the messaging around what women need to be doing post-menopause? Because you work with this, with a group of athletes, and everyone. When I say athlete, I mean active individual. So what's your strategy there? Because the message of lift heavy and what that is, and I know heavy is relative, but could I still lift light? Like, could I still go post-menopause, Mikki at 55 or 60? Could I go in and do my 8 to 12 reps and feel confident that I could still be progressing?
Yeah, and I actively work in the real world with people who have gone through menopause and have then worked with them decades afterwards. I love this field, and all I care about is improving a client's bone mineral density, muscle mass, metabolic health, and general well-being. I don't care about arguments. I don't care about having statements that are catchy and sell books. It's just what is the best method for a female, full stop. And the changes that undergo hormonally are no longer there to support bone and muscle in the same way estrogen was pre-menopause, which means we need to artificially, or mechanotransduction, we need to push that into the skeletal muscle via a stimulus. But this is what blows me away a little bit, because when you read the literature, the changes that undergo a female through the hormonal transition, with or without hormonal help, this new phenotype that will occur, let's call it from 55 onwards, is well defined. And insulin resistance increases and testosterone drops and estrogen becomes non-existent and so forth. So what are we going to do about it? What do we change post-menopause to what we did pre-menopause? And people have looked, well-intentioned people have looked at the literature and say, here are the hormone changes. Now you need to train differently. And when I look at coaching, I think, well, that doesn't actually make sense, because if you want to preserve fast twitch fibers, both males and females lose fast twitch fibers as we age. We know this to be the case. In a study that came out this week, a really well-designed study showed that men are probably losing it faster than females are. So now we're teasing this difference out, but let's grant it that it's an even drop, okay? When you lift weights, you're using fast twitch fibers. And Stu Phillips has been on about this now for 15 years. If you fail at 8 reps versus 10 reps versus 30 reps, and you fail, you can't do another rep, you've used your fast twitch fibers, because the Henneman size principle says it's used on a needs basis. And when you approach effort and task failure, you will use all available fibers. Yes, there are subtle differences between failing at 5 versus failing at 20 in terms of the motor unit pool. And Bill Kramer's done a lot of work in this field. And Mike Roberts is now continuing with that legacy. But from a meaningful difference, Mikki, if you are 60 and you do leg press and you fail at 20 versus 5, you've used all of your fast twitch muscle fibers. And this is where I put my coaching hat on and say, we're telling postmenopausal women to lift heavy or to do sprint interval training or and not to do X, Y, and Z or to do much less of it. I think that's not good coaching. Good coaching would mean that you would progress. As somebody who says, I'm going to take up weight training, bravo, we need to prepare you. We need to prepare your tendons, ligaments, bones, your neuromuscular system to understand how to coordinate safe movement pattern and to handle load. Over many years, you might choose to incorporate strength and power work, and I think that's a good idea. Would I dream to do that under 2 years of somebody with no training experience? No coach would. Only somebody who's read the literature and said, they need to preserve fast twitch fibers. Let's just do max strength work. That does not give justice to the wide body of literature that we know.
Yeah. And Tony, you're quite vocal about that, aren't you? Like, I've seen you on social media. You're just like, hey, this is where it's at with regards to the literature about what we should and shouldn't be doing.
It all comes from, ordinarily I wouldn't. In other words, as a coach most of the time, my social media is as a, hey, here's an interesting study that I thought was cool, so let's put that up. Or here's a training method that for many people who don't have access to 1,000 bits of equipment and they've got barbells and dumbbells, how can you have planned variation? Because you can't just swap exercise. You've only got a barbell. So we need different methods. So a lot of the posts are, well, here's a drop set, and I've got 15 different ways you can do a drop set. And you can always use the same bit of equipment, but you can do it slightly differently and then have variation, because variation is an important part of progressive overload. But my direct messages, every morning I'd wake up and there would be a dozen messages saying, hey, what do you think about this? And I'd look at that and say, well, to me as a coach who reads science, that doesn't make sense. And then my friends' wives would start texting me and say, hey, it's me. I just read this. I'm going to stop zone 2 training and do sprint interval training. And what do you think? And so therefore I started just being a little bit more vocal, and hopefully it's just presented for those people who don't know about the debate can look back and say, actually, that sounds pretty sensible. You got to alternate hard and easy days. You got to prepare the body for heavy lifting. You can incorporate max strength work once you've earned the right to do that.
Yeah.
But if you choose to do 10, 20, 30 reps, it's probably easier on your joints. And as long as you work with effort, you will use your fast twitch fibers.
So, I mean, people think about training for hypertrophy and training for strength. So if I shift to a more general discussion about that, Tony, because I'm super interested in this, because as my physique has actually changed a little bit in the last 3 years, where I've been focusing more on lifting and lifting in that rep range of anywhere from sort of probably 8 to 15, let's say, and trying to be consistent 2 to 3 times a week, slightly more if I am injured and not running, which you probably arguably would be at least a third of the time. But is what I need to, and I'm primarily interested in my strength and preserving it for as long as possible, I suppose. Do they always go hand in hand? Like, if I'm training for strength, will I also sort of build my muscle as well?
It depends on how you want to look at strength and what you think is meaningful. It is well understood in the studies that have looked at rep range differences and then measured maximal strength, that the closer you work to your maximum ability, which is your 1 RM, versus, say, a 15 RM, you will get stronger in the 1 RM for neurological reasons, primarily. The brain understands how to coordinate the agonist and the antagonist to perform that movement under heavy loads. And this is what weightlifting and powerlifting is exposing the brain and the nervous system to the exact loading and pattern that you need for that sport. Now, my question then as a coach, as a son, as a brother, as a friend is, how important is your 1 to 5 RM as you age? I have aging parents. the ability to carry their own bags and to take the lid off the pickles from the fridge and to put the shopping bags in the car, that's not your 1 RM. Strength is your ability to produce force. So if your 10 RM goes up or 20 RM goes up, you're getting stronger. I think we're missing the point here. It's not what makes you maximally stronger, it's what makes you stronger. And any lifting of weights will do that. Should older individuals or postmenopausal females incorporate a variety of rep ranges? And the answer is yes. Because as my earliest mentor would say, what's the best rep range? He would say, it's the one that you're not doing. You need planned variation. But it's this myopic focus that if you are older, you must be doing 5 sets of 5. It's like, well, hang on. That's just one of literally hundreds of different set rep schemes that we can use over the training years. Because if you do 5 sets of 5 more than once a year, you're leaving performance gains on the table. There are dozens of different methods that we can use. So we miss it. We misunderstand that we're not talking about maximal strength. We're just talking about strength, and any weight training will do that.
Okay. And so this might make you cringe, right? But I have a range of different programs that I sort of dive in and out of, depending on how I feel on a given day. And I'm like, well, if I go in the gym, and I already sort of know that I'll be training my lower body once, or doing my upper body twice. In fact, I'll do a full body, and then I'll do 2 upper bodies, and I'll talk to you about this in a minute. And what I do, like the actual exercises itself and the actual rep range might vary as well, but I'll aim to feel a certain way at the end of it. So I'll be like, okay, well, I'm going to do my back and my shoulders and chest or whatever. But I'm not what I don't like, Tony, which is quite unusual because I'm quite regimented in many areas of my life. But in the gym, I've realized I don't love following a program for 8 weeks. It's the same.
Yeah, I get that. So if you spoke to Tony 15 years ago, everything that we know about this, so in terms of the history of the science of understanding how this happens, first, we've got the generalized theories of training, which occurred with Nikolai Orzolen in the 1950s and 60s. And then the theories of periodization came out, and then it moved to really strength power oriented with Zatsiorsky, Rokoshansky, and that whole history of Russian literature. Then the Americans came on board in the 1980s with Mike Stone, Bill Kramer, and then that's this journey of where we've come. A lot of our understanding of program, even the programming fundamentals in 2004 by Kramer and colleagues, show that you stick to a program for a period of time so that the body adjusts neurologically and muscularly to the program. As time has gone on, there have been more studies that have had muscle-centric rather than metrics, power, rate of force development, speed, strength. So we're now just looking at muscle. And the ideas that we have a program and we stick to it is coming from the history of that last 60 years of training for a quality, but hypertrophy is not a strength quality. It's an adaptation to resistance training. Yes, you can make a really strong argument, and people like Brett Contreras have done this eloquently, in that you don't just want to mix it up every time you come and train. You want to get like a hip thrust and push that, hit a new PR, and then move on. So I get that, and I don't have a disagreement. But 15 years ago, I had a number of clients who had worked with me, again, for 10, 15 years and said, I'm getting tired of doing the same thing for 4 weeks and then changing. So would you mind if we train the same muscles, but you just give me something different? Now, at first, my inner Tony said, no, you have to stick to the program. And it was like I was having a stroke. My brain couldn't comprehend that we would change it up. But I thought, well, why not? Let's test it. Let's do a DEXA scan. Let's get some strength metrics.
Yeah.
And let's do this.
Yeah.
So we auto-regulated training. And yes, I knew going in that it was lower body or hip dominant or whatever it was, but we kept it varied, changed the method, changed the exercises, and then DEXA it. And everyone went up in muscle mass. And if there was a body composition, then fat mass went down.
Amazing.
And there was enough DEXA to say, well, hang on, maybe it's just challenging muscle. That's the most important thing. And yes, there's only so many good exercises, so there is similarity. But I have a number of clients who never do the same program ever.
Wow.
And there is only improvement.
Yeah.
So that does challenge. Now, it's going to be a difficult study to design, but you can do that study. So I have sympathy to both. So for most people, I design clients. But Mikki, if you say to me, give me something. So a client I work with remotely in America, I just sent her 24 different templates and she just picks based on what she wants.
I love it. And that is it is basically like Russian roulette every time I go into the gym. And I'm like,
absolutely.
My training's chaos theory, actually.
Yeah, chaos theory. Yeah.
I love it. It's like I describe my endurance bases like, is that gray zone. I love the gray zone. I love chaos theory.
Yeah,
and I'm not the worst athlete in the world either. So, and I guess it could also just come down to your goals as well, because my goal is to be fit and healthy and resilient and independent into my older years.
Yeah.
I'm not wanting to be a world champion. And I think probably my goals are very similar to 99% of the people out there.
Yeah. If you were saying, I am going to the Olympics and I need a very specific quality of performance, that changes the discussion. If it is, I like exercise and I want bone and I want muscle and I want healthy metabolism and I want to enjoy what I'm doing, great. Let's change our programming structure to better suit your compliance so that you're excited about going tomorrow because you happen to like that one. And this is where it's based very loosely on Bill Kramer's idea and Steve Fleck's idea of flexible nonlinear periodization, which all came about from athletes who had fixed periodization schemes, but because of their competition on the weekend and then their training demands on the week, didn't often feel like doing strength and power on Monday because they're so fatigued. So they had a smorgasbord to choose from. You're feeling beat up, then you might do more restorative work. Now, what I'm saying to any coach listening will go, right, we've been doing this for a long time. But there is a very narrow-minded, myopic view in coaching that you have to stick to a program for 3 to 5 weeks. And anyone knows in muscle is still adapting way much longer than that. So we do that to keep a client interested. So why not do it for a week? And I have enough proof now, DEXA proven, to have made me change my mind about that. Because again, 15 years ago, I would not have believed it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this. Like the way you think about fitness and strength hypertrophy is very much aligned with a friend of mine, Darren, who's in this space as well. And he's similarly, he's got his master's in strength and conditioning, and he works with a range of different people. And I've asked him this question, so I'm keen to hear your thoughts on what's the go on rest period between when you can then go into the gym and do something again. You know, like what's the deal? Can I do squats 5 days in a row? Or can I work legs 5 days in a row?
It always depends on your goal and your personality type.
All right.
And how well you absorb the training. And if your personality type is, I like to train every day, and I did one of these programs for a client last week who would prefer a 20-minute session, 20 to 30 minutes, but just wants to train every day. But you cannot, unless you think about it. You will overwork the shoulder, in particular in the upper body. Shoulders used in everything. It doesn't matter whether you're doing delts, arms, you're using the shoulders. And you're really using your hips and lumbar spine in everything lower body. So you can't just do it indiscriminately. It does need thought process. But why not train every day? And it's this idea of recovery. And recovery, time course of recovery is different depending on which system you're looking at. You've got muscular system, and fast twitch and slow twitch recover at different rates. We've got this from the wonderful work of Wim de Vries in Belgium, which has looked at both strength training and aerobic training and look at the time course recovery between slow and fast twitch individuals. And when we look at how often you're training in the week, well, how fit are you? How well do you recover? How much training can you absorb and positively adapt to? That is the only way you can answer it, and everyone is different. And ideally, if your brief is to, well, I love training and I want to train as much as possible, then the goal is to get you as fit as possible so you can tolerate training demands. But that process might be a year long to incrementally increase your ability to absorb training volume. And the enemy of absorbing training full stop is intensity. And this is where the idea of, well, you want to stop short of failure. You want to leave a rep in the tap when you're doing tanking, when you're doing interval training, and so forth. And that's where you can get into the weeds of, well, how you can construct that.
Yeah, okay, super interesting, and sort of a lot, and definitely aligned with Darren's approach to train your muscles to optimize for whatever you're optimizing to. Which, for the most part, when we discuss this, it's in a sort of fat loss context and things like that. Tony, I'm keen on your thoughts on the any interference with sort of endurance-based training and strength-based training, and how you program strength-based training for your endurance people, which would be me as well. So it's a bit of a selfish question, actually.
It comes back to this phrase, meaningful difference.
Okay.
And most of those in the space who understand the different modes of exercise, they are doing different things. From the molecular trigger to start that cascade to increase muscle protein synthesis for contractile proteins, or whether the synthesis is for that trigger is for more mitochondrial proteins. Those pathways are distinct. And that led with the pioneering discoveries of Bob Hickson in the 1970s, 80s to say, when you do, and he was a maniac, so it was a powerlifting program and a 10,000 meter track program. And when you do these things together, there is a payoff, and that payoff is in strength. They didn't look at hypertrophy initially. It was strength. He didn't. It was a solo study. Now, since that time, when molecular science came out, which was after my time as a uni student, we didn't know anything about this stuff. But when all the molecular data came out, is, well, one is doing this and that is that. And John Hawley would say, do opposites distract? Yeah, they're doing different things. So do you need, since sport often, unless it's weightlifting and powerlifting, sport requires strength, speed, power, endurance to varying degrees. So do we do them in the same session? Do we do one morning and night? Do we do them on different days? How do we get around this? And the research, it has been pretty well studied in different athletic population groups. But what is really difficult, and coming back to the sentence, the meaningful difference that you would notice. From a practical perspective, Mikki, if I gave you a leg dominant workout on Monday and asked you to run 25 kilometers Tuesday, it's not going to happen. So how do we get around this? And if you look at the training programs of world tour cyclists that I've worked with, or Olympic level runners who I've worked with, the training volume is so obscenely low because we cannot interfere from the main sessions.
Okay. But so the strength-based training volume is low. Is that what you're saying? So
ridiculously low.
Yeah.
And this is where you have to work with head coach. So when we say, Tony, you've coached, I've told the athletes what to do in the weights room. They've got a proper coach who does the coaching, and we're the support staff. And you speak with them to say, well, what is their ground reaction forces like if they're a boxer, or what is happening to their speed or their power numbers? And we try and move these things around so that there's less interference, or we plan the recovery run, the rest day before that legs, because I think it's well accepted that improving strength and bringing up antagonistic weak areas for runners, cyclists, or whoever it is will improve longevity and performance in the long term. Again, we get myopic. Will improving strength and power improve cycling? Debatable. Will it help longevity? Undoubtedly. And this is the things that we're considering and the level of experience. So if we're using you as an example, we look across your week and we ask ourselves, do you want upper body musculature? And as an elite runner, that answer is no, not really, except most runners that I've worked with actually benefit from arm strength for their swing. So that aside, we then say, well, generally speaking, we don't want upper body musculature. We want lower body. So where does it fit into the training week? But you might say, I want a little bit of running, but I also want healthy upper body bone and muscle mass as I age. So, okay, then we might need to start incorporating more upper body training. Now, upper body can go on the same day that you are running. It's the ground impact forces of running that seem to have this negative knock-on from the resistance training. And that's where I go low volume. And it could be just one or two lower body strength exercises, and then the rest are preventative. We work on ankle and shin and hip and core with maybe 2 sets and higher reps, not to fatigue, to raise that neurological awareness of how to recruit those muscles a little bit better. And then we go on feedback. How do you feel? Is your running times allowing for an adaptational period? How are you feeling?
Okay, nice one. So what I'm hearing is that my split that I just told you I did earlier, like 3 sort of upper body-ish workouts and a lower body, might be aligned with what you're just describing, because I still want that upper body strength and muscle mass, but I don't necessarily want to waste my legs because I've got a run on Sunday that I want to, a run hike that is going to be, a few hours out, and I want to sort of save myself for that.
That's right. And that's where you look at minimum dose. And if you're using weight training to age well, but to also help running performance, but to also minimize injury, we look at what is not being done for a runner. For an elite runner, we do that in the off season. So we do everything that's not done in running in the off season, then we get rid of it, and then they do their season. For somebody who just loves running and wants to be a good runner, then we actually have to incorporate that in the year, and we wouldn't use a more traditional athletic periodization. And we would use minimum dose. What's the minimum that you need to improve strength/muscle mass for the lower body? And I think the other consideration here is this whole concept of low energy. And this is what I think has perhaps confounded some of the early literature, is that I just jumped off the bike before we did this call. I used a power meter and a heart rate monitor, and I did 600-ish calories. If I now sit in low energy while we do this, and then after this, I'm going to go and lift weights. If I don't eat until I get back from weights, I have now got an extended period of low energy. And as anyone who understands this field knows, that low energy is the enemy of muscle hypertrophy. So I speak to anyone in the muscle world, is like, right, we're going to eat regularly. We're going to keep providing that anabolic stimulus to muscle. And this is where I think a lot of endurance athletes who add weight training come undone, is because you expend so much energy moving your body, whether it's running, cycling, swimming, that when you come to lift weights, you're in low energy. And I make sure that all athletes understand that some of the negatives you see from adding weight training to aerobic, or vice versa, for those people, I strongly encourage the muscle world to have more cardio for metabolic benefits. A lot of people just think it's all about weight loss. You get enormous metabolic benefits from a variety of different zones in training, but they expend a lot of energy. So unless you're eating that back, you will be in low energy when you're lifting weights. And muscle doesn't really like low energy when trying to get bigger.
Yeah, nice one. And, I've got my program, you'll be familiar with it, I assume, but Mondays Matter, and it's it's a fat loss plan. Yeah. And one of the things I really try and hone in on the participants, 80% of them are female, are to fuel around their training, which they may not be in the habit of doing. And, from my read of the literature is that, when you are in a sufficient calorie balance and you've timed your training around meals, then, eating in addition to that might not necessarily be a problem. But if you're in a calorie deficit and you're training early, people do, which I love, because you do it, you're in the habit of doing it. You just need something else in the tank. Like, it's not enough just to get up and train in a fasted state and then go for a long period of time. That's like a sort of accelerating that in potential for injury, which this might not be an issue if you're maintaining your weight and you've got a healthy calorie balance.
Well, that's right. And so there are individual differences, but when looking at broad statements, this was clearly a mistake I've made in my coaching. When the first time restricted eating studies came out in rodents with Sachin Panda, this was about 2012. I remember at one of our major conferences that next year, 2013, I basically did the rookie mistake, stood up and said, this is where it's all at, everyone. You're gonna have 8 hours of eating, 16 hours of fasting. And if you wake up and you train in that fasted state and then refrain from eating, then your ketones will go up and autophagy will go up. And we thought that was great. And now we didn't have human data. And I certainly didn't do it on enough people with DEXAs to actually look at what's going on. And then we started getting the DEXA stuff coming in and said, we're losing muscle mass here. So that's not good. In any way you look at it, whatever else is going up, if muscle's going down, that is not good. So we changed the approach. And this was prior to the wonderful work from Grant Tinsley that's come out looking at then adding resistance training and so forth. But we were able to, this is the beauty where if you have access to DEXA and blood testing, you can do this stuff in real time straight away. I should have done that before telling an audience. So that's a problem. So the issue here, and I think it's Sam Impey and James Morton who talk about fueling for the demands or fueling for the task. And they use that red light, green light, orange light. I use the same idea, is that if you are doing something casual, it's an upper body session, it's Pilates yoga, it's an easy jog, walk, you don't need a lot of carbs. You don't need the same energy. But if you're doing an hour of HIIT or a lower body workout, you need to fuel for the demand. And so for those people who are serious about their training, then yes, you will need to structure your pre-meal. And that could be the dinner before if you're training first thing in the morning. You have a beautiful muscular and liver system to support that training system before you have breakfast. But as long as you're rolling like that, then I've not seen a problem. And I've been using that ever since that paper came out a number of years ago. It works really well. For the general public who's just doing an hour a day, upper body, lower body cardio, I tend to not go into the weeds because you are then telling people to change things each day, and most people are creatures of habit. And I have found the feedback has been a bit above my pay grade. I don't really care that much. And as you said, as long as your weight's stable, then maybe you don't need to go into the weeds that much.
Yeah. And my other point to those people when they are in that fat loss phase is that you want to feel good in your workouts, actually.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to struggle
100%.
and suffer when you're already in this, you're focused on changing your food to improve your body composition. Like, you don't get additional gains from doing it in a fasted state. And if anything, it's going to likely reduce your overall metabolic output. You may burn less calories.
Yeah.
And then you feel crap for the rest of the day. So that's the other thing I talk about.
Let's think, what are we trying to do? And I've worked with several world champions in the physique world who are females, who, when we are getting to the pointy end, and they're now down at around 5 kilograms of total body fat. So that's so lean that you can see the pancreas producing insulin now. It is super lean. Now, we always fuel the training session. And in that week, we might train, for the girls, it's lower body dominant, obviously. They might train glutes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the volumes are prodigious because they're really at the pointy end. And we're wrapping that session with nutrition to get the most out of it. If they turn up on fumes, you're not going to recruit fast twitch fibers. This is back to the Henneman principle, is that if you want fast twitch fiber recruitment to hypertrophy, then you need to go in a high energy status. So how do we balance that? By having to be weekly in low energy. Well, that's where we energy cycle. You don't train the same way every day, nor does the same training session have the same goal. So we have that red light, green light system based on what they're doing.
Yeah, and to your point, like, this is where you do get into the weeds for those people who have clear, specific goals, whereas the general population who are just rocking up to the gym at 6 a.m. So this is related to what you're saying, I think, if you are training females and they rock on up fasted, they train all right, they feel all right, their hormones are fine, are you just going to go, that's fine?
Absolutely, because it's the pre-meal, which was the dinner before. So a lot of people train fasted, and this idea that women shouldn't train fasted, I think, well, hang on, I've trained fasted females for 30 years, and I've never seen an issue in performance, in DEXA scans, in blood work, in CGMs, you name it. I just don't see it. So where is this scaremongering coming from? And then you look at the literature, and there are these different peptides or different hormones that change with sensitivity to glucose control when glucose goes down. It's like, right, evolution worked this out long ago. You just need enough time to adapt to it. You cannot use a 24-hour study where you exercise somebody in the morning and their glucose levels drop and then measure a peptide and then impute that that's going to do something to your fertility or it's going to do something to your bone. And I think this is a really nice point, because in our world, we would use high and low carb approaches depending on the genotype. We've talked about me offline, how I'm not good, despite exercising as much as I do, I'm not good at handling carbs. So I go lower carbs. But if we're dealing with someone else who does handle carbs well, you will use a different approach. Now, there's data that has come out to show that an acute low carb availability can change bone turnover. But everyone in sports nutrition knows you can't do this acutely. You need long-term adaptation to that style of diet. Otherwise, we would see so many women with bone density problems who are on lower carb or ketogenic diets, and we don't see that. And that's why we need scientists to say, well, hang on, there's a problem with that study before you start telling females to never train in the fasted state. Because if that works for you and then suddenly you're scared into not doing it and you're force feeding yourself at 5 a.m, that doesn't make sense as well. So it really does. I just scratch my head that there are people who have got voices and people listen to them who make claims based on mechanistic studies with no training outcomes and scare women off doing something. We want women to exercise. No barriers to that.
Yeah.
If they exercise first thing in the morning and they're scared off that and have to slam down a banana because they're scared. That's why we have a liver. That's why we have muscles. And that's why we need an adaptational period.
Yeah, nice one. And for what it's worth, I've recently been looking at some stuff online, and low carbohydrate availability is often conflated with low energy availability.
Yes, correct.
And even if you look at studies around low carbohydrate availability, they are quoting or referencing low energy availability studies.
Yeah.
So just because something is maybe written in the literature or you see it linked in a blog online does not necessarily mean that it's that what it's being referenced as is in fact correct.
That's right. There is a really long history of low carb research with folks like Jeff Volek and others who have looked at kind of almost every conceivable configuration of a well-constructed low carb or ketogenic diet. There is also, and I know these people, super nice people, great researchers who are doing acute low carb availability and low energy studies that are then reporting on these acute markers. And it really is scaring many people off, manipulating carbs or manipulating energy availability based on this acute data. And I think it takes voices who are in the coaching world who can read science to say, this is why they did this study. And this is the only thing we can take from it. This does not mean you can't try X, Y, and Z. Because there are great voices. I think Dan Plews is one of the best voices in this field saying we need an adaptation period. And 1 week, yes, you're going to see fat oxidation change significantly. Yes, the weight training world is very underrepresented in this, especially the muscle world. Jeff Volek has done great work, but a lot of people really are not aware of his literature at all.
No, I know. Yeah, I completely agree. And for what it's worth, and this is an interesting point, is that some researchers, and James Morton is one of them, are now questioning the low energy availability data that we think we understand, and really pointed out something that's quite obvious actually, is that there's so much underreporting that goes on. And in their estimation, once you account for that underreporting, many of the issues that we feel that have been equated to low energy availability may not be due to the energy intake, but may instead be due to stress or training stress or life stress and stuff like that. So because I've had this conversation with a friend of mine who's a dietitian in this field, and she's been practicing for longer than we have, and she's like, I just don't see what they're saying out there,
Yeah. And James is he works in the real world with real athletes who are at the very top end of the sport. And I think they're really nice ideas where they think, well, let's try and ramp up fat metabolism this way, and let's do prolonged water-only rides. And I think people like Brad Wiggins and Geraint Thomas, Chris Froome, they were all have reported, we would go for 7 hours on a coffee and these kinds of things. I have been able to collect blood on people who've done these kinds of approaches, and they had unmeasurable testosterone upon getting back from these rides. They were zero. So you are hypogonadal. You have shut off your testosterone production by training like this. And I love coaches who think outside the box and let's try stuff. Great. And let's measure some potentially off-target effects, give it enough time to adapt and see, is it doing what we want to do based on mechanism? And it comes back to mechanism. There's the difference between something acute term with an underlying mechanism versus actually its application in the real world.
Now, tell me, Tony, I'm super interested, and I know that we have to wrap it up, but like when you do a test like that and you see this unmeasurable testosterone, are you then in a position to do a test in 12 hours to see, does it just shift back up again? Like, what's the story?
Yeah, we can. We can do it as often as we want. And yeah, it goes back up, but not to the endurance world, who also play around with fasting. I think is a very dangerous combination.
Yeah.
They're usually hypogonadal already. And when we measure resting metabolic rate with indirect calorimetry on the same day, in the same hour that we've done a DEXA scan, we are always seeing metabolic adaptation. So when you read studies that metabolic adaptation is an artifact and doesn't happen, it's like, I see it. I see it all the time. So for those who do a lot of exercise in the fasted state and you measure RMR, it's always, the record that I had was 430 something under what the DEXA said it should have been, using a Cunningham equation looking at fat-free mass.
Yeah, interesting.
That's a design. So that's consistent with Kevin Hall's data.
Yeah. And then I'm not sure if I'm sure you are aware of Katia Martin's work looking at, and her premise is, well, there is metabolic adaptation, but you just need a bit of time. You just need a bit of time for the energy availability to come back online, and then RMR is corrected. Yeah. Is that what you see?
No, absolutely not. And she is the work that I reference in that. I think her paper was, this is an artifact. It's not done long enough. So in the world that I live in, where people diet for months on end, that's where we see it. And it persists. So we see it persisting later. Now, her argument was, well, with Kevin Hall, when they retested them, they all tried to diet again to get themselves back into shape, knowing they were going to be retested. It's like, okay. But I work in the physique world, where it's not uncommon to subside in massive low energy availability for months on end. And in many of the case studies that have come out, and there's a number now of good case studies, and our Eric Helms have done this stuff, that yes, this is what happens. And then once they refeed, then it goes back to normal. I have seen both the people who are regular water fasters and those people who have done a more renegade approach to dieting, that when you RMR them back in a build phase, they're still running low. And we can measure T3 and confirm that.
Yeah, so in your experience, Tony, then how long does it take? And this will be, that we're going to have to potentially, with this conversation, maybe move it to another podcast. I'm super interested, but just very briefly, like, how long does it take for your physique athletes to move out of that low energy availability state?
Yeah. If I have been in control, we have no problem. So no red S symptoms, no loss of menstrual cycle. Also clean, which is something that the vast majority of females would take Anavar or Osteron, so either anabolic steroid or a selective androgen receptor modulator.
Oh, wow.
It is rife. And now that does different things, but I only work with clean people, and they have to promise they're clean, and we blood test them to make sure that that's the case.
So you're in natural bodybuilding?
I'm only natural.
Yeah.
I'm only natural. And some of the physiques that you will see, they've been accused of being on drugs because the physiques are so good, but we've got 10 years of blood work where you can detect changes. So we're absolutely sure that they're clean.
Yeah.
Now, we've never seen red S because I've always used the fuel according to the task approach. So we go in and out of energy availability, but we've got them down to 5 and 6 kilograms of total body fat at competition time. And how long does it take to get them back up again? Well, we have a step. We use a different approach, and I've used different approaches. We just don't know. But yes, T3 runs a little bit low when we get them at competition time. But by typically a month later, everything is back to normal.
Interesting. So interesting. And if you're okay with this, Tony, I'd love to get you back on and talk more specifically about physique and what you do there, because we do have to leave it here. But I find it super fascinating, actually. So unsurprisingly, because this is the stuff I love to think about.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating world, because everything is devoted to that. Now, athletes, of course, they're devoted, but this is whether for good or for bad, it is a completely black hole of absorption where everything is controlled, from sleep to training to nutrition to every macronutrient. They weigh everything.
Yes.
And measure training output. So we have a really good audience. So when you get those people and you DEXA them and blood test them and even RMR them, you've got a really good audience.
100%. And for what it's worth, the fact, I think physique you can learn a lot from physique sport because it's the extreme of the human experience, really, when it comes to...
If only cyclists would understand, or endurance athletes, is that we have a group of people who really know how to manipulate body fat.
Yeah.
They've mastered this.
Yeah.
Yes, you guys, you've done other things, but you're not good at losing body fat. You'll ride on fumes for hours, and no physique person is doing that. So yes, this is what I find is very siloed. The people don't speak. I love cross-disciplinary work. So I'm reading everything from mechanistic stuff in labs to what endurance athletes do to what the strength, power, muscle, and try and find a common ground that can work depending what the goal is.
Awesome, Tony. So can you let people know where they can find you on the socials and on the internet?
Sure. Most of the coaching things that I do, with a little bit of information on things I find interesting in the science world, is on Instagram, and it's my name, Tony Boutagy. I have a website, Tony Boutagy. And Twitter, I'm not active. I actually have a fake Twitter account, which I've followed you for years on, and then we realized we actually weren't following each other. Tony Boutagy on Twitter as well, but I just put up studies that I think, hey, I just read that this morning, there you go. So
nice one. That's what I do too. Yeah. I love it, Tony. Hey, thank you so much for your time, and we will organise that next episode.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, hopefully you enjoyed a lot of what Tony had to share, and as I said at the outset, he provides such a wealth of information out there on social media. I learn things from his feed almost every time I go into it, so I highly recommend that you give Tony a follow. Next week on the podcast, I have the honour of speaking to Dr Krista Williden about intermittent fasting and some myths and misconceptions, and she is one of the pioneering researchers in this space. Until then, though, you can catch me over on Instagram, Threads and Twitter at Mikki Williden, Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head to my website mikkywilliden.com, book a one-on-one call with me. All right, team, you have a great week. See you later.